On this week's episode of In an Instant, we take a look at the Instax Wide Evo, a hybrid camera that takes digital pictures that you can then print onto Instax Wide film. This camera has received the Viewer's Choice Badge for the most requested camera yet to be reviewed on this channel. So me, an analog guy, is going to dive into the digital waters and see what we can find at the bottom. Will it be treasure or will it be bones? Let's find out. If it's like just bones.
The kind of photography that would become part of the human being. Press a button and have the picture.
Welcome to In an Instant. My name is Ben, and today we have a gorgeous looking camera on the table called the Instax Wide Evo. A camera so unusually designed, it almost looks like it was AI generated and then retroactively engineered in reality. After a 9-year drought without any Instax Wide camera releases by Fuji, making the format appear to potentially be left for dead, we've been treated to a sudden deluge of new products, including the Instax Wide 400 analog camera, Instax Wide Evo hybrid camera, and even an upgrade to Lomography's Instax Wide shooter with the Lomo Instant Wide glass. The Wide Evo, an objectively strange name, is an alternate format successor to the Instax Mini Evo, which I took a look at in 2021. The Mini Evo was the first and thus far only digital camera that I've reviewed on this channel, until going Wide Evo on today. Both of these cameras are in the hybrid category of instant cameras, in that they have small digital sensors which take the picture, and then if you choose to print it, the image can then be essentially scanned onto Instax film line by line. The obvious benefit of this sort of camera is that you only have to print the images you like, reducing mistakes or poor exposures that cost you cashola. But the distinction between a hybrid camera and an analog one is a bit deeper than that. And it's the reason that I'm predisposed to typically avoid cameras like this. With an analog camera, like the Wide 400 for example, when you take a picture, light enters through a lens and then exposes onto film. This very simple fact is what makes every single image one of a kind, arguably what makes instant film special in many ways. The other distinguishing factor is that analog cameras are physically exposing onto a pretty large canvas, giving you the depth and lensing characteristics only possible with a format as big as Polaroid or Instax Wide. The digital pictures from the Evo are conversely exposing onto a much tinier canvas, a small sensor, and so the images are objectively flatter and have a very deep depth of field. It's for this same reason that iPhone photos are typically very flat looking, and that they've created a portrait mode which digitally simulates the look of a camera with a larger sensor. These tiny sensors also require wide lenses to capture an adequate field of view. That's why you'll notice the lens on the Wide Evo is 16 millimeters versus the lens on the Wide 400, which is 95 millimeters. That tremendous difference in the normal lens illustrates the drastic distinction between using a tiny digital sensor and a classic analog film format of that scale. And more importantly, it's the difference between taking a photo on film and printing a photo onto film. Now, I say all of this because this kind of stuff matters to me as a photographer, and I feel differently when I look at a photo that is the result of light and lens versus one that was printed out and could be duplicated infinite times. I preface this review with all these distinctions because some people couldn't give a shit about everything I just said. I explained this to my mom and she kind of looked at me and then said, yeah, but like with the Evo, you could print more photos to give out to grandpa. And yeah, like I totally understand that too. And many people simply don't care about the process or the deeper meaning of a truly instant image, and rather simply want to take some fun shots and print them out to hang up, hand out, or even never print them at all and just use the digital files the camera produces. And this camera will be for those people. And many of them exist, which is why I'm giving this camera a hard look. Everything about the Wide Evo is simultaneously beautiful and strange. I say this with nothing but love in my heart, but the way the camera is configured makes almost no sense. With something as simple as turning the flash on and off banished to a sub-menu, and something as random as putting fake film sprockets on the picture given precedent as the top button on the camera. Instead of the wheels on the side of the camera controlling something like exposure compensation, they cycle through splashy color and effects filters, which can only be utilized prior to exposure. You can't add the effects to your pictures after you've taken them. Elsewhere, your active options are to pull up info about which effects you currently have toggled, a different button that also pulls up the effects, a delete button, which is inactive while shooting, the play button to review your images, and the menu, which gives you access to actual in-camera adjustments like exposure compensation, a self-timer, flash modes, white balance, which is weird to see on an instant camera, a buried macro mode, and a deeper menu for system settings. There's even a hidden button that's only purpose is to reset effects, and the lens has a dial, but it's to adjust how intense the effects are. They went crazy with the effects buttons and shockingly stingied out with the image control buttons, of which there are none. The front of the camera does have a physical switch to toggle the wide angle lens, which is really cool and nice to have its own physical switch for. And then there's the shutter button, which is unlike any I've ever seen. The print lever is objectively the most awesome thing anyone can put on a hybrid camera these days. A simulation of a crank to eject photos, which actually is just a print button basically, that toggles an asynchronous animation of the film ejecting as the film emerges in real life. A micro SD slot enables practically unlimited shooting, with internal storage being able to handle about 45 images, so you can basically just use this as a digital camera if you want. And I'm not afraid to say that is perhaps where this camera brings the most to planet Earth. The first Mini Evo also produced small digital images, but the quality wasn't adequate enough in my opinion for the photos to feel like usable standalone digicam images. They were very crunchy and low res. The Wide Evo's digital output isn't a triumph for all camera kind, but they do work as digipics, pulling on the strings of more recent nostalgia of the early 2000s rather than the 70s to 90s, which is where other instant film draws much of its sentimentality. As a digicam and printer, it's an objectively fun tool, and even the most hardened photographers such as myself can acknowledge that sometimes photos just need to be simply fun, and the process can be more spontaneous and less refined, and the images of your life and of your dog don't always need to be recorded on precious materials. Using the camera mostly as a digital camera that I occasionally print with, I found the sensation of using it very similar to taking a photo with my iPhone and then printing it with something like the Polaroid High Print, or even just printing it on the Evo using app connection. The images from this camera can vary based on available light, and the sensor can differ drastically in terms of exposure, I found. Kind of hilarious, as you'd expect not to have to use exposure compensation so much when using a simpler digital process, but you kind of do have to ride it a bit. This is because the digital files are not exactly technically good, and by that I mean, like Instax Film, the images have limited dynamic range. In contrasty lighting, you have to choose between blowing out your highlights or crushing your shadows. I believe they designed the digital files to behave this way so that the image you see on screen is relatively close to the image you'll ultimately see printed out. But it can make getting a usable picture in camera quite difficult sometimes, with exposure compensation helping, but the exposure process overall being pretty temperamental and laggy. The shooting pace of the camera itself is definitely slower than you might expect, which is maybe a good thing, as you could theoretically shoot 1,000 images with it without a care, and thinking is sometimes good. A half press toggles AF, or a full hard press goes through the full focus, hunt, lock, and exposure process, which takes about 1.5 seconds. Applying effects filters and color filters come with the convenience of the thumb wheels, but kind of gave me decision paralysis, as there are mathematically a lot of different combos you could go with. And they are then baked into the picture. You can't strip them off when reviewing and printing. It's ironic that I would even want to be able to adjust the image after exposure, given I surrender all such control when normally shooting instant film, but something about the way the camera is set up makes it feel like I should be able to, especially because these thumb wheels are so tantalizingly present when you're viewing an image to print, but do nothing. There are also different effects available on the Wide Evo than were provided on the Mini version. Effects like diptychs on the Mini Evo would have really optimized the wide format, and the fisheye and soft focus looks were some of my favorites on the Mini, but aren't present on the Wide either. Like the Mini, the Wide Evo doesn't have a viewfinder, which is irreconcilably weird, especially in harsh broad daylight where the screen is okay, but I usually can't see very well what I'm shooting. Some kind of hood on the back could be cool, or yeah, just a viewfinder. It doesn't have to be electronic. Oh yeah, and this camera takes USB-C charging. It's my favorite port. Unlike Fuji's simpler analog devices, however, the battery isn't user replaceable. I think you could theoretically disassemble the camera and disconnect the proprietary battery inside and then reconnect it to a somewhat equivalent battery, but at that point you may as well forget about cameras and hack the next general election in your home country, because you're a tech wizard. But please don't use your spells on me, wizard. I'm very spell sensitive and scare easily around potions. Oh, something about potions. Last and possibly least, the Evo does have app connectivity. through which you can further sever the relationship between image and instantaneousness by simply printing anything onto Instax Wide, from an image you took with your phone to a screenshotted meme. And it is with that I cue us into a segment called You Asked It. As this camera is our audience choice review, I rolled out the welcome mat for you viewers to send in questions to then be answered much later in this video. Let's do it. Matt Warlow asked, how heavy does it feel to hold? The Wide Evo is extremely light actually, and feels quite delicate. The lack of weight is nice in some respects, as I can wear it all day around my neck, but I feel like this camera really needs to be protected when not in use, as its rear screen is totally exposed, and in general, I don't know that this camera could survive much abuse. By Sunny D asks, how does the wide angle compare to the normal lens? I love you, Sunny, and I'm in love with you, and not just because you asked this question or because you starred prominently in the Mini Evo video. The wide angle lens on the Wide Evo is really cool, I think. It's at the very least unique to have on the digital camera side of the operation, but I will admit that when printed, they look odd to me as they have a very digital onto film appearance. The lens doesn't look like a natural instant film lens. Of course, this is coming from someone who stares at instant pictures every day, and that may not matter whatsoever to most users. Most users are probably like, why is this guy freaking yelling so much? Nathan ZN6 asks, can it be considered analog photography anymore? I got several variations on this question, but in short, I would say no. This is digital photography with a printer that utilizes film as the print material, similar to shooting something on a phone and using the Polaroid Lab or an Instax dedicated printer. Stay-at-home doctor asked, how does the mouth feel? Actually not bad. Norf99 asked, can we get a side-by-side of a phone camera photo printed alongside the built-in camera? I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to try, as people will be doing both with the Evo, and here are the results. The phone camera is much better, which is understandable. It's a fairly high-end device at this point, and it also expands the dynamic range of the images substantially in sensor, so shots that would be blown out or underexposed if you shot them with the Evo work all right with the mobile to print pipeline. And now we're also gonna do pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. Aesthetic. I don't use the term design here because the buttons aren't well suited for the actual necessities of practical shooting, but the aesthetic of the Wide Evo is really interesting and certainly produces that lean-in quality where people just wanna ask, like, what the hell is that thing? Improved image quality. While the files from the Evo could hardly replace a modern digital camera or a phone, I have enjoyed using the Evo as a digicam, and I think the quality has improved over the original Evos such that it's somewhat usable on its own. And cons. Metering. I'd say if you don't touch exposure compensation, flash, and you don't try to really work the image out, your photos will very likely be under or overexposed in a lot of scenarios. I found surprising difficulty in this regard, and users coming from their phone, like just using their phone camera, will have to sit down and really learn exposure compensation, how to ride it, and you can't expect immediate bangers. And configuration. With the amount of time you have to spend altering those settings, I think it's a critical miss that they aren't accessible via the physical dials or buttons on this camera. Like, they gave us a lot of buttons and none of them do that. Menus are hard to thumb through on a screen in bright daylight, and I find that I spend a lot of time using this camera looking at it like in front of a subject, being like, okay, let me just put the filter on. Oh, that filter's kind of crazy. We are way overexposed. Let me just turn that down a little bit. Okay. While the subject is like, why did I stop for this? I don't really want to be here right now. This is like not really ideal. Oh, this guy is freaking lost. Oh, I'd rather be back in the office playing solitaire for 8 hours, pretending I'm working. Lastly, taking a look back at the Instax Mini Evo, I will say I fell a bit more for that camera at the time than the wide version now. I rewatched the review I made in 2021 with Sunny and Matty Ice, and while the wide and mini versions are both lighthearted fun, the Mini Evo felt a little bit easier to handle despite being an earlier generation of this product. It's not like it had solves for a lot of the quirks I've encountered on its wide successor, but it wasn't as slow to operate, and I didn't need to lean on exposure adjustments as much. I also actually genuinely love some of its built-in creative filters, and they are prints that I still keep around because they're so unique and unlike something I'd get on any other camera. I think it's crazy that some of them were omitted from the Wide Evo, given how well suited they would have been for the larger film size. The Mini Evo thus has a little bit of a higher capability to do what I call melting pixels, where yes, you're shooting with a digital camera, but certain flourishes can take the edge off the digitalism and give you something that is less apparently a digital file printed onto a film stock. Although hybrid cameras continue to be core to Fujifilm's lineup, they haven't taken over as I once feared, and there are plenty of straight up analog options too. It would have been far more disconcerting if this was released without any sign of an analog wide update, but we got one. And so the option for either style of camera for all formats seem safely present and available. I'm really curious what everyone thinks of this thing. It occupies such a strange place in the industry and the art form for me, but everyone's opinions differ about what constitutes an analog image, an instant image, how this format is used. There's a spectrum of where this camera can exist in someone's heart. So let me know where you stand, or where you sit, or where you sort of do like a half squat. Thank you for watching in an instant. Go ahead and do a half squat on that subscribe button. You know, just sit all the way down on it. Just press the button. Stay tuned and have the picture. Stay tuned for more reviews, breakdowns, shoots, and all things instant. Bye.